Today on Curious Crossroads, we're joined by Michael Potter, a seasoned author and poet whose work explores the deep terrain of love, healing, and the human spirit. He brings a rare blend of compassion, insight, and lyrical beauty to everything he writes. Mike, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Let's just kind of go to your backstory a little bit. Obviously, we're interested. You do digital art. You've written 4 books. Where does that interest come from? Just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your background.
I was born at Northwestern Hospital in Minneapolis in September of 1956. Lived with my grandfather for 2 years in South Minneapolis off of 51st and Portland, really nice area of town. We lived with him for a couple years, and then my parents found a house in a new development in Coon Rapids.
We actually went to high school together.
Yeah.
We knew of each other.
Yeah.
But really didn't hang out.
Yeah, I know. It's like I started off in junior high, really hanging out with the athletic crowd and with the student council members. And as I started getting into alcohol and smoking and other things, that kind of degenerated into the hippie rebel clique of friends. And
Sure.
so I was less and less connected with the people who were really doing well in high school. But I really developed a very significant problem with alcohol and drugs, and it started, like I was about 15 and a half, and it kind of got worse over the ensuing years. I went to college at the University of Minnesota just out of high school, was in the pre-med program in the College of Liberal Arts, and I used to tell people that my drinking interfered with my college, but I was corrected on that some years later in treatment by my counselor, who said that my college interfered with my drinking. And that was pretty much the truth. And I drank until I was about 25, 26, and a number of things. I was engaged at 21 to a beautiful young lady I met at college, and that fell apart. It got much worse over the ensuing years. Got in some bad car accidents, broke my wrist, ended up on a psych ward for a week because I was having panic attacks and anxiety and severe depression.
And was your drinking just when you went out? Was it at home? Was it in the morning, evening? I mean, because there's different types of
very
drinking
good question.
And drunks.
I was mainly a party and bar drinker.
Right, okay.
So it was when I went out, and when I moved away from home for a while in 1980, we were drinking at home quite a bit. We worked, my roommates and I worked, but when we got home, we were drinking. And we were drinking before we went to the bar. It was called getting primed. We got a little over primed and then went to the bar and drank for the rest of the night. So,
yeah, we call that pregame.
Yeah, pregame. So it was really, and really, when I look at it, I was looking at what was driving this? And for me, I had a lot of really deep-seated insecurity and anxiety growing up in my house. My dad was a World War II vet who was traumatized by his experience in the war. He was in the VA hospital for 5 years. He was exhibiting psychotic symptoms. It was really very serious, and they gave him insulin shock treatments and a number of things to try to help him. And then finally, they thought, well, the only thing we can do to try to help him is to give him a frontal lobotomy, and which is removal of brain tissue. And my mother intervened on that and said, no, you're not doing that to my husband. She was able to get him out of there, and as soon as that happened, he started to improve. And he improved significantly enough over the next year or two that he was able to find employment as a machinist, which he did for his whole working career until he retired in 1984. But he wasn't entirely healed from what had happened to him. At heart, my father was a very loving, caring human being, and he took time with me, teaching me how to play catch and get into sports. But when he was stressed and when he was kind of cornered by my mother sometimes, because she was really good at verbal arguments, and it left my dad kind of defenseless. So then he would just explode, and it would be ugly. There'd be abuse and things flying around the living room and the kitchen. And so the thing for me with all of that was it was really unpredictable. It was an unstable home environment, and you never really knew when the anger outbursts were going to happen and what was going to happen. I mean, there were many times that he threatened my mother's life. Just the fighting just went off the rails, and I remember running down in my room and putting the pillow over my head, over my ears, so I couldn't hear the screaming. And I kept thinking, God, what if he kills her? And maybe I should run and try to tell someone. But I was so afraid that he would kill me before I got out the door. I mean, it was really very terrifying.
Scary.
So what that instilled with me, and I share this not to blame my parents for what was happening with me, because I believe everything is really cause and effect. I mean, there's probably a genetic component to the anxiety that I had, but it was really influenced by environment and by circumstances. So my dad would get mad and he'd blow up at me and he would call me names and he would belittle me, and sometimes I'd get whipped with a belt or other things. And as a child, you know, when that happened to me, I mean, he always thought that he was trying to teach me a lesson. He was trying to provide me with discipline and guidance, but that's not how I took it. How I took it is that I must be really bad if I make my dad so angry. That really influenced my psychological development in my late childhood and into my early adolescent years. Going into junior high in 1969, it was anxiety producing enough by itself, but the level that I brought to it from what I lived with really exacerbated.
Is this where the drinking started to kind of compensate for that?
Yes, this is the intersection. So in ninth grade was where it hit its peak intensity, and that is when I went to my first field party. I was invited by one of my friends who was walking down the street smoking a cigarette. I thought, God, he looks really cool, and I said, hey, come on up, because we've been friends before. And I said, yeah. I said, you got another one of those cigarettes? So he gave me a cigarette. That was my first cigarette. And then when I consumed my first alcohol, it was like I found the magic solution.
So that was it at the field party.
Yes.
Where it all started with the drinking.
Yes, I had bought a 6-pack of 16-ounce grain belt tall boys and was drinking that. And then there was a bottle of sloe gin being passed around the fire at the party. And as I consumed that and felt that just this magical transformation internally of, you know, the anxiety and the insecurity just left.
Yeah, being released.
Yes, and then I felt so like liberated and like I could be social and not worry what anyone thought of me, and that's...
And you know, really, when you think about it, as far as, because I had very much the same experience. A lot of people go through that period where they're drinking at the field parties and having the, you know, feeling great. It's just that a lot of us, or a lot of them, because I'm sober as well, get over the hump.
Right.
And others stay behind and keep drinking, and it becomes their whole life and it consumes them.
Yes.
And that's kind of where you fell into.
Yes, and I'll tell you, you know, I really believe, as a result of all my years in education and experience working in the addiction recovery field, that, you know, it's not simply a matter of genetics. It's usually a combination. I had a family history of alcoholism. I had an uncle and some other more distant relatives that had alcohol problems. So there's a genetic component of it. But from my initial experience drinking and the amount of contentment and satisfaction I got from the effects of alcohol really created in my mind this kind of immediate connection, I got to do this again because this is the greatest thing ever. I mean, this felt like the answer to all the insecurity that I had experienced as a child.
Right.
And I really didn't think all of that out consciously, but it was a really, I think, an immediate kind of psychological dependence on the effect of it.
I was going to say real quick, too, you seem like extremely self-aware of like why you were drinking and the different things like that. When did you really start to understand, you know, why you were drinking? I mean, was that early on or was that later on in your career?
Well, a critical event happened. My mother called me one day just to check in on me, and you know, she knew I was drinking a lot. She was really concerned about it. And she said, you know, Mike, you're not the person I brought into this world. I don't know who you are anymore. And it hit me. It was like, wow, I don't know who I am anymore. I was completely lost in it. So that was the clincher for me. I got a hold of the employee assistance program representative, and they got me set up with an assessment at Mercy. I went in, and the assessment was the classic 20 questions. Are you an alcoholic? Which I answered yes for every single one of those. And they said, we want you an inpatient right away, which was good because I was really, I was just a mess. I was a mess psychologically and physically. And the first week I went through tranquilizer withdrawal, and this is a very crucial moment about the third night. In 1982, their medical supervision of tranquilizer withdrawal was not state of the art. It wasn't like it was 20 years after that. I had no medication, and it was horrible. I could have died from it. Fortunately, I didn't, but it was so horrible. I remember, because my faith in God and everything had been shaken by all of my experience, and I was kind of an arrogant atheist for a number of years in college, and but that all came crashing down under the weight of really painful reality and despair and hopelessness. And I just remember praying, whatever is true, please help me. And the next day in group, all of a sudden, all my anxiety was gone.
Just like that.
Just like that, gone. Like it. I was sitting in a group. We were talking about the second step of the AA program, which is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Counselor was facilitating that group. I was sitting in the chair, and all of a sudden I felt this wave come from the top of my head and carry all the way through my body. And when it left my body, it took all the anxiety with it.
Wow.
I have no explanation for that. It could have been the exact end of my withdrawal process.
Right.
But it was a convincer for me, because I thought,
Right.
I've been praying for this for years,
Yeah.
and here it is. So I'm in 100% on this whole process right now. So then the next critical thing that happened was I was attending a Saturday morning lecture by Ernie Larson. Ernie Larson was one of the great communicators and teachers of recovery in the Twin Cities. He left the priesthood. He was a Catholic priest. And he was conducting a seminar that particular Saturday on codependency, which is kind of an over-reliance on other people, which tends to happen to the family members of alcoholics. So Ernie was giving an example. Here's an example where, the father has a horrible day at work, and he comes home and he's angry, and he storms into the house, and the kids do one thing wrong, and he starts yelling and screaming at the kids and taking it out on. So he's explaining all this, and I'm running through my head exactly the same scenario that I lived. Because when my dad came home from work, I could tell by how fast he drove up our gravel driveway how angry he was. If he roared up that driveway and slammed on the brakes and the rocks went flying, I knew it was going to be bad news when he came in the door. And so the yelling and screaming would start. And then Ernie was explaining this, and then Ernie was explaining that, and the child takes the father's anger and internalizes it and turns it on themselves and thinks that there's something wrong or bad about them. And that's when the light bulb went off for me. This is exactly what I did for all those years as a child. And then I realized that I had mistakenly concluded that I was no good or not good enough or inadequate. I mistakenly concluded that because I couldn't understand, because my brain hadn't adequately developed yet to understand that Dad had a bad day at work and he was just taking it out on me. So then it started to click that my insecurity has come from that. And then I was drinking to make that go away.
Right.
And it didn't work. It made it worse. And maybe there's a way in this recovery process to find out how I can undo all of that illusion and false conclusion in my mind. Maybe this program will offer a way for me to do that. And that's exactly what happened over the ensuing period of time. And then I just went on this kind of crusade of learning everything that I could about it.
I know that you actually ended up working at Hazelden, which is a facility for recovering addicts and alcoholics.
It's one of the most well-known, right?
Absolutely, worldwide, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and how did that come to be? I mean, when did that happen?
I got my first job in the recovery field as a detox technician at an adolescent detox facility in South Minneapolis. It's on 20th and Franklin. And it was really, really rough work. I mean, the police said break up parties, and they'd haul in all these angry, drunk kids, and we'd have to process them and get them calmed down. That whole stint took about 13 years. So I left there and I got an entry-level job at Hazelden in 1999. And then I was there for 13 years.
Did you find, is there any common denominator? I mean, everybody's got their own story, but are the majority of them similar stories to like what you went through, the bad home situation, starting to drink because you want to self-medicate yourself? I mean, do they all kind of follow a pattern?
I think that The majority of them that I worked with was similar to that, but there was outliers to that too. I mean, as I worked in Hazelden, there were more and more patients or clients there that were from higher levels of the socioeconomic ladder in society. And then it started to shift more that they were, I don't know, kind of entitled and just had a false sense of kind of feeling like they were better than other people or more capable than other people, or they were never held accountable for their own behavior, and they just developed this false sense of entitlement, and then it just got out of control, and they got into alcohol and drugs. So it was a different kind of aspect of it. Like on the spectrum of self-worth, on one end you have extreme egotism, arrogance, grandiosity, conceit. And on the other end, on the flip side, is kind of this sense of worthlessness and being subhuman in a way, inadequate, unworthy, incapable. That's kind of a spectrum.
That's interesting.
Could you usually tell right away after visiting with somebody for, say, an hour or a day or so, whether or not you were going to be able to reach them, whether or not you were going to be able to help them? Or could you see just by talking with them that he's not ready? Or she's not ready?
A lot of times it would be readily apparent that they weren't ready. And a really good example is if the family had worked with a professional organization to put together an intervention. And this is all arranged. The family's going to, get together, and they're going to confront the patient and give them their concerns about the patient's drug or alcohol use, and then tell them basically that they're not going to be able to stay at home or be able to have interaction with the family unless they go to treatment. And if the patient was not ready to hear that or accept that, then they were very angry and forced into going to treatment against their will. And I ran into that in my, original or initial assessments of the people that I was working with. I could tell that right away that they were angry, and then I knew it was going to be a really rough road for them. Sometimes, though, through the course of treatment, some people, because they had a really good peer interaction program at Hazelden, the peers themselves did most of the emotional and fellowship type aspect of treatment, helping that person to feel connected and involved and part of. Sometimes that would turn people while they were there. And they might swing over to being more open to doing what they needed to do to change as a result of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that actually part of the process when they go in, is help them realize, like, you have to be ready to change before we can even, like, do anything.
We try to help them towards that.
That's why early, get them to understand it, come to the realization.
My initial assignment in treatment was, give me a list of 10 harmful consequences of your drinking. And I was still kind of foggy, but then I thought, well, I think I probably have 300 or 400 consequences. So which 10 am I going to pick out of this list? But that was part of the process of, yes, this is the actual reality of the result of your use. And how do you feel about that? And if the person actually felt some genuine remorse or regret, now that was something that we could work with.
Right.
We built on top of that.
So let's start to incorporate your writing. When did that start to play into? I mean, was it during these times when you were at Hazelden? Did you start to write then?
No, it was before that.
It was even before that.
Yeah. So in the middle 1980s, in my early recovery process, outpatient therapy I was doing, I got exposed to this new. It was kind of a enlightened way of understanding psychology. It was called Psychology of Mind. There were representatives in the Twin Cities. Joe Bailey was one of the leading proponents of it. He led the Minneapolis Institute of Mental Health, and they started putting on seminars at the treatment centers. And this person named Sidney Banks, he was kind of a philosopher on psychology, and his enlightenment was that we're just using our own thinking against ourselves, and we don't realize that we're doing it. I didn't realize until later that that's the basic premise of Buddhism. Buddhism was the original psychotherapy in 500 BC, but it was very much related to that. But it was very intriguing to me because I hadn't been aware before of the fact, well, except for that one day in Ernie Larson's lecture where I realized that I was concluding that my self-worth was not good because how I was being treated by my dad, and that was kind of a process of using my own thinking against myself. But it really started to sink in as a result of this other exposure to this new kind of therapy and understanding that, it's really how we use our ability to think is a really critical thing. I mean, we can use our ability to think against ourselves. We can create novel thoughts, imaginary thoughts, and then give them reality in our mind, and then create stress and anxiety and depression from that. That was really monumentally helpful to me because I always had a really good imagination, and I started to really understand the fact that I had been good at using it against myself, especially with anxiety. Imagine all kinds of possible catastrophic things that could happen to me, and then seeing some evidence that they were actually happening, and then creating evidence that they were actually happening, and then having a panic. So then that brought me to a new level of kind of understanding things, and that's when the writing started. I started journaling about what was my history of how I developed my beliefs and my reactions to the things I was experiencing in life, and how I was using that against myself, and how all of that together was working to create this really unsatisfactory experience of life.
But you're saying basically that your thinking was becoming your reality? Like it's like the way you were thinking, you were putting it out into reality?
That's exactly what had happened.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the mind needs to be healed or sane enough. There's a function in our prefrontal cortex, our ability to be objective about our own thinking, where we can take a step back from ourselves and our mind and think, I have this belief. Is that really based on reality, or did I just make that up, or did I get that from someone who didn't know what they were talking about? But that was a really, really helpful realization to see that. And so I really started to understand that I had been unwittingly, unconsciously, creating all these negative illusions of thought in my own mind, and then using them against myself, creating enormous insecurity and feelings of inadequacy and not being good enough, and that creating so much distress and pain and anguish that drinking alcohol or taking drugs seemed to be the solution, because it took it away. But what the alcohol was actually doing, in fact, was interfering with my own negative thinking and putting it to sleep, because alcohol is a depressant, and it was putting that thinking to sleep, or at least slowing it down to the extent that I couldn't keep that cognitive disaster of train of thought going. Mm-hmm. So, and then the enlightenment came to me like, okay, this is all going on. What am I missing here? What have I been missing my whole life? The chance to be happy with myself, to believe in my own ability and capability, or to see the good in myself, to see the good in other people, because I'd been so cynical and negative. And I thought, wow, there's a whole other reality here that I have not really been able to experience because of this. And what else is possible? And as a result of that new kind of psychological way of understanding things that I was exposed to, they brought forth the idea of spirituality, that there's a greater, more positive spiritual reality that's at the heart of existence, that you cannot really interact with it or be aware of it when your mind is doing all this negative, negative habits of thinking and of
right.
And another example they used is like, if your mind was seen as like a glass lens, and a clear lens that you could look out on reality and see the way it really is, but all of your negative thoughts and beliefs are creating all this contamination and disturbance and blocking your clear vision, so that life doesn't look so wonderful and lovely. It looks really, really bad. And that your ability to see life the way that it really is being thwarted or blocked by your own negative thoughts. And that's when I became aware, God, what am I missing? Yeah. What have I been missing?
And that's where the writing started?
That's where the writing started, because then I started to understand that, there's this whole lovely, beautiful, amazing world, and the universe and how incredible everything is. And this is the big reality. This is the big picture of reality that I've been missing. Right.
So did the journaling and your writing help to keep you sober and on path?
That's a really good question, Doug, is that, when the divorce happened for the first time in my life, I was living on my own in a little efficiency apartment in South Minneapolis by Lake Harriet, wonderful location, but I was scared to death. What am I going to do by myself? And that's where the encroachment of my insecurity and I'm not good enough. I mean, the marriage failure had just been the evidence that, see, I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, I'm inadequate. Right. And it was caving in on me. And I remember praying in my new apartment by myself, God, why do I struggle so much with this? What's wrong with me?
Well, I bet it would have been easy to start drinking again, too.
I thought about that, Doug. So I started to think it through, which I had enough sobriety at that point, 6 or 7 years of sobriety, that I was able to think and say, okay, if I decided to go to the bar and sit with all the guys who are bitter and angry about their horrible ex-wives and, commune with them and fellowship with them, what's that going to do for me?
Right.
And I realized, I'm already in a lot of pain and suffering, and if I go do that, that just magnifies what I'm already struggling with. So that's not a good choice. What else can I do? Maybe there's something that I'm doing that's helping create this problem in my relationships. Am I doing something unconsciously that's pushing people away or alienating people? And that was a whole opening towards some very constructive self-appraisal and additional therapy. So I had additional therapy, relationship therapy, and then I started to discover more things. But part of the process was I would put these questions to God. Why do I feel so unworthy, unlovable, like such a failure? And I would meditate on it, and all of a sudden these thoughts started coming into my head. Thoughts like, you are more valuable than you can possibly understand or imagine. Or, you could never do anything so wrong that would separate you from my love, my continual, perpetual, unbreakable love that I have for you. I thought, wow, this is good stuff. I mean, it started to pull me out of being depressed.
So that was coming to you?
Yes, it was coming
through
to me.
meditation?
You'd ask a question,
Yep.
and then you'd have the answer.
Yep, and so that was in the AA.
And were you writing this stuff down?
Yes. Well, at first it's like, I feel really, this is, and I thought, I got to write this stuff down, because if I get in this state of mind again, I can refer back to it and it will help bring me out of it. And that's exactly so I started filling journals with all these things that were coming to me. It was like I connected with some kind of a stream of consciousness that I had never experienced before. And in the AA program, they talk about making direct contact with your higher power, conscious contact. And I think for the first time in my life, I had actually succeeded in doing that. As an act of humility, like, I don't know the answer. I have no idea. I don't have the answer to what's wrong with me. I mean, I'm sober, but there's more going on here that I'm really struggling with. Why? And so all these answers started to come. So I was writing them down, and that became the basis of my new understanding of my higher power and of God. I was being informed on a completely different level, over and above what I learned from the Bible growing up, because I had a lot of that education and exposure as a kid. Bible school, Sunday school, religious training, reading the Bible, going to church. But this was something much deeper and much more heartfelt. And, it was I felt connection with this higher power. Like he or she was talking to me through my own thoughts. Now, when one has that experience, you might want to run that past people to see if you're having a psychotic episode or not. I mean, it's important to get objectivity on what you feel like what is being revealed to you. But So
did you need validation, or did you say, I'm going to go through with this?
I just continued with it because I trusted where it was coming from. I knew that this isn't coming from my own limited intelligence and understanding, maybe facilitated by it, but that wasn't the source of it. The source was someplace deeper and more pure and more profound than anything I had ever come up with. So I felt like, in a way, I was kind of channeling this stuff. And I don't really understand it all that well, but I that's what I started to really believe, that So I would fill up these journals, journal after journal after journal, over 10 years of living on my own. I had boxes filled with them. And so that's where that all came together. And it was really revolutionary for me, because compared to all the things I had learned about God and higher power early in my life, I started to understand that, we human beings, through our entire history of thinking about such things, and with our limited mind and our limited understanding and the finite structure of our brain, maybe we're just barely scratching the surface on this whole thing. We've never really had a real good idea or understanding of it. Maybe it's a lot vaster and more profound and deeper than we've even realized. And that's what started to come to me. Because the idea was this idea that, and whenever I talk about this with anyone, I always say, I can't prove any of this stuff. This is just what's come to me, and it makes sense to me, and I could be wrong, but it really helps me. So the idea was that at the heart of reality is this source of infinite and eternal and unlimited love. I use the word love because it's a qualifier that helps describe the quality of this source that has created the whole universe with all the wonders and amazing, magnificent structures and complexity and forces and things that we're continually discovering, and our knowledge of it's expanding. And what all of this reflects is that at the heart of it, there's some amazing, wonderful thing going on that is broadcasting all this into existence. And at the same time, it's not like the old idea of the architect in the sky who's got their drafting board and they're planning it all and figuring it out, and okay, and we're going to do this. No, the whole thing is kind of unleashed out of a love that we can barely understand, to be free to create itself, to evolve. And it uses forces of chance and chaos and unpredictability, which I learned in chaos theory and when I was in college, that sometimes order can spontaneously arise out of chaos, like the structure of a hurricane and very vast, complex meteorological elements over the Atlantic Ocean, that all of a sudden now you got this swirling disk of destruction. I mean, so I started thinking about that and thinking, God, what an awesome idea that is, that this source of all being has set all of reality free to create itself, and chaos is part of it, but out of the chaos is coming this structure and order. It was a whole new understanding of perhaps divine creation, that many people would say, well, it just can't arise out of chaos. It doesn't come from nothing, but maybe it does. I mean, it adds a whole nother dimension of nobility and beauty about the creative mechanism, that the whole universe has evolved out of this chaos and structure, and then has evolved, constantly improving itself through constant and continuous interaction with itself. And all these new structures and forms are being created, and that's what we see. And it's such a deep and profound and beautiful idea, and informed a lot from science. I really owe a debt of gratitude to science and people like Carl Sagan, who had the wonderful Cosmos series in 1980, just explaining the scientific view of nature and reality. And I thought, well, that's not really intended to disprove the idea of God. Maybe it's describing divine creation. Maybe.
Right.
So then bringing all of that home to the human level is like, we are, on our planet 5 billion years or so since the creation of the earth and the evolution and all the changes the earth has gone through. Somehow life got started here 4.5 billion years ago with, very small pieces of maybe RNA, and then the first cells, and then over the millions and millions of years evolved into all these amazing structures and forms. And now there's us, that we are creations out of the basic elements of the earth. And now we can sit here at Curious Crossroads and contemplate all of this that we exist within, and how few of us are really ever aware of just how amazing and astonishing the fact of our existence really is.
Do you think that a lot of us are missing the boat because And I think it's just the
Distraction?
answer is because of distraction.
Distraction.
We've got so many useless things filled up in our brain that we're worried about or concerned about.
You're worried about the stock market. You're worried about different things like that don't actually matter or can get you to the next step of understanding.
In our modern world with all the devices and the information, absolutely, we're disconnected, and it's created this very deep-seated kind of angst that none of us can really put our finger on. So that goes to my central realization, was this realization about love. So what love is in practical terms for us is a state of awareness in which we are awake to how amazing and precious and astonishing and profound reality really is. All the creation, our lives, how wondrous everything is, and how that reflects on us that we have this value as a being, as a creature, as a creation that we can't even measure. We have no measuring stick, but we have a sense of, God, we're just amazing beings. And the important point of that is not any more amazing or valuable than anyone else. I mean, we're all in the same boat. We're just astonishing, amazing creations and creatures. And if we have that awareness and are informed by it, and it brings us to life kind of emotionally that, God, things are way different than I ever thought. And maybe I should do a better job of honoring the value of myself or of my brothers or my sisters or my family or my community or my country, to treat it as valuable as it is. That's kind of a pragmatic understanding of the consciousness of love. Realizing the value and feeling compelled in a way to try to act to honor that. So if we look at our world and all the things that we're distracted by and disconnected from, and how we're just kind of flailing about, trying to live our lives, and the news is filled with constant disaster of what's happening in Ukraine, and and there's real sorrow and suffering happening all over the world, but we're not finding the answer to it. But in this love, there is an answer to it.
What would you say would be, if it was up to you, what would be the first step that you think people could take to try and reach that goal or head towards that goal? Meditation or turn off the TV? Do you have one thing that you would say would be a starting point?
Yeah, it's hard, It's hard just
well, I suppose everybody's at different levels, too.
Right. It's hard just to turn off the TV, and when you're so adapted to that, the constant entertainment and the constant information, and just to shut it off is really disquieting to most people. But that's, I think, an essential thing, like shutting it all down, leaving your devices, going up north to the Boundary Waters.
Right.
There's a lodge up there in a cabin, and staying in the cabin for a week without any other distraction and just being present starts to put you back in touch with that essential awareness. It's the beginning.
Mm-hmm. I think it goes back to that AA thing too, of like, you have to, some people aren't ready for it. You have to find
That's
the desire
too.
For it. Like you gotta want it.
Right.
You gotta understand what it is, and then you gotta want that.
And
then find that spark of like whatever's going to get you to the next thing. But you got to kind of want to search for it.
Yeah, and the thing is that we can start putting this word out to people instead of the word that's going out there right now, because the word that's going out there right now is that, the Democrats are all evil and they're destroying the country. No, it's the fascist Republicans, and it's the news outlets that are turning people,
manipulating,
just to gain viewership, just to get ratings.
One of the worst things is the manipulation of media.
Yes, and
by far, because of how much power it has over so many people.
Absolutely. It's day in and day out.
It's painting this whole vision for people of reality that's all based on conflict and difference and divisiveness, and everyone wonder, why are we so divided? Why can't we get along? Because we're just being overwhelmed with all this negative information.
It goes back to what you said with like your thoughts become reality. Well, those are the thoughts. They're being put out there to us. We're now living in their false reality.
You nailed that right on the head, and that is a very big problem in our society. So what I'm saying here is that, start putting out the information that I came to throughout my recovery, of people who are very wise and very well informed about psychology and about spirituality, and just helped me to realize that the world I've created in my head from my own thinking is no bearing on the deeper reality of existence. It's a false understanding of reality that looks pretty horrible and stressful and hopeless. But there's a greater reality underneath all of that. It's not a matter of trading one delusion for another. It's a matter of trading delusion for the real reality. And how we're all in this together, and we really need each other, and we really depend on each other in our communities, in our states, in our society, in our world, to save ourselves from the destruction that we're headed for if this kind of thing is not stopped, because it is very destructive. I mean, it's the kind of thing that, when Hitler used all that propaganda in the 30s against the Jews, scapegoating them for the problems of the Germans, and what devastating consequence that became in actual carrying it out. Now, what's happening now is not the same as that, but there's some similarities between that are very concerning. Demonizing groups of people based on opinion and not fact, based on assumption and based on political ambition. The 1% at the top, now it's my own political view again, I could be dead wrong about this, but the power structure at the very top wants to stay entrenched in their power and control, and they want to try to deter any possible threat to that. So the thing I'm talking about, if the individual cultivated this mindset of loving awareness and tried their very best to live out of that and let that help them grow and evolve and grow deeper, because there's no end to it. There's no end to how loving we can become. And it's not that we want to become a saint. It's just that we can become better and better at it. We can get along better with ourselves. We can get along better with our families. We can get along better in our communities and in our government and in our world. That's all possible with this. And it starts with us. So if that kind of information was out there more, so that people got exposure to that no, we understand what's causing the divisiveness. And it's not blaming one group or other. It's just understanding the processes that are at work that are causing us to not see reality the way it really is. And we're reacting to it in a really kind of destructive, negative way. And hardly anyone understands what's happening.
It's funny too, because I was just looking on ChatGPT AI. I was asking it the other day. I'm like, what's the purpose of humans? Once AI can do everything that humans can do, and it's basically saying it gives us the opportunity to have more conversations like this, to look deeper into what are humans. So everything you've been talking about is we now have the ability to look into that and search for it.
Let's get back to your books a little bit.
Okay,
just a little bit. You've got 4 books out there, right?
Yes.
I'm going to start with the one that kind of I'm just wondering about. All the books are based in love, but then you have Let It Ring, Help for Coping with Tinnitus.
Yes.
What is that all about? Obviously we know tinnitus is where people have a constant ringing in their ears.
Well,
and you came up with a non-medical book.
Yeah.
Is it also based in love, helping?
Fundamentally it is. But I borrowed a lot of ideas from mindfulness practice and Buddhism to help me with this. So the basic thing was, I was playing this game called volleyball at the gym at Hazelden and serving the ball, and it's in a racquetball court, and I'd throw the ball up and I'd hit it. I was hitting the ball as hard as I could, but I didn't realize that the sound and the shock waves from hitting the ball were bouncing off the wall right next to my ear and channeling those waves into my ear, and it was damaging the hairs in my inner ear, which caused some hearing loss, which also resulted in this constant ringing in my ear. And I woke up in the morning one morning and just ringing, and it just never stopped. And it was really, really unsettling and disturbing, and I tried to find out about it, and I went to the doctor, and they said, well, Mike, what's happening is that the nerve in your ear is dying, and that's the sound that it makes as it dying, and then the sound is going to slowly fade away and go. And that was entirely false, what he told me.
Really?
Yes, he just said that to help me feel better, because they didn't really there's no cure for it.
Right.
So the sound kept going on. I was having trouble sleeping. I didn't have silence in my head anymore. It was really disturbing. And I got a hold of someone from the American Tinnitus Association. I found out about that online talked to them, and they got me in touch with one of the people that's one of the directors, and he was an over-the-road trucker, and he developed tinnitus in both of his ears from the sound of the diesel engines in his truck. And he said, well, Mike, the first thing you got to realize is that it's not going to kill you. It's not fatal. And he said, it'll only drive you crazy if you let it. But no, it's not going to kill you. And you can just get used to it. And then you can get used to it, and then it's not going to bother you so much. But that's going to take time. So my question was, well, how exactly do you get used to it? If it's constantly ringing. But the other thing I learned, which was from understanding about how I use my thinking against myself, was my reactions to it. I'm going to go crazy. I'll never have silence again. I won't be able to sleep. I'm not going to be able to just listen to things normally. One catastrophic, disturbing conclusion after another, which thinking those thoughts and believing them to be true generated more and more stress for me and made my experience of the tinnitus worse. So I just started, I started spending more time on the computer, helping my in-laws. They got a new computer. They didn't know how to run it, so I was helping them with things. And I noticed I've been on here an hour, and I didn't hear that ringing in my ear once over that hour. What happened? I wasn't paying attention to it. I had my mind focused on something else. And that's where it clicked in my head that this may be the answer. I mean, if they can't cure it, maybe if you can just take your attention off of it, you can just live your life without it being, an impediment. And that's exactly what happened. So I even got to the point where I would meditate, and the focus of the meditation would be the ringing in my ear, and I would practicing just listening to it without reacting to it.
It's
so now
interesting.
You're using it.
It's interesting that he says that, because before he came in, you were saying that
I like that.
You don't mind.
Yeah, I don't mind.
He has some minor tinnitus, and he doesn't mind the sound. Didn't you say you find it almost soothing?
Yeah, I kind of like it when it's quiet and I just hear the hum.
So instead of a negative, like you say, you turn it into a positive.
He turned it into a positive with the meditation.
That's really good, because I've heard other people describe it as, you can consider it the sound of the life energy surging through your body.
Sure.
It's telling you that you're alive, and it's,
there you go.
That's a beautiful thought.
Now, is that something that's available to the public, or is that
it's on Amazon? I published it on Amazon.
Is there a cover to that?
Yeah.
Let's see why don't you hold that up just so we can let
Two photos. I took one of a bell my wife had in my own ear, and I superimposed the bell over the ear.
Oh, okay. Great. I see it now.
So I
didn't see it at first.
Nice.
So that's Let It Ring.
Yep. Very short.
Help for coping with tinnitus.
Yes.
Is there another book then?
Well, so the other one, actually, there's three, and one of the three, Breaths of Love, I've had 5 editions of.
Okay.
This one is called Being and Becoming. Love is the Answer.
Okay.
This is a rewriting of my master's thesis from graduate school.
And this is available on Amazon?
Also published on Amazon.
Okay. So this is the Fiesta Resistance. This is everything compiled into this, basically?
That's my latest compendium of all of my work from all those journals I wrote when I lived by myself, and kind of compiling all of that and condensing it and reworking it into a finalized form somewhat of poems and prose.
What I really liked about the book, and again, it's available on Amazon, what I really liked about it is you do not have to read this book from the first page through to the last page.
Right.
You can basically pick any page, and it stands alone and has its own meaning, its own poem, its own prose. So what I thought was kind of funny was when I opened up your book the first time, I just randomly opened it up. Mm-hmm. And as everybody knows, I put the cork in the bottle 28 years ago. But the very first one I open up is called It's Not the Drink You Need. And here's how it goes. You wake up once again hungover from drinking too much of the stuff, feeling anxious and exhausted. It's not the drink you need, but love. You drank to gain acceptance, join the crowd, be part of. But now lonely and rejected, you know it's not the drink you need, but love. All your life you've run from fear, from not being good enough. But you can face all this and know it's not the drink you need, but love. Once happy and carefree, the drink has made you irritable and gruff. But you can find yourself and know it's not the drink you need, but love. You've been ruined by the obsession. The drinking life's been tough, but you can leave it all behind. It's not the drink you need, but love. Alcohol was never meant to replace what you're made of. If you look within your heart, you'll see it's not the drink you need, but love. I just thought it was just so, how things just seem to happen sometimes, and to open it up to that page the first time I open your book. So,
yeah, that's really neat.
and then, like I say, what is my soul? I mean, you can literally pick, you can almost use it as a daily meditation.
Yeah.
You know, just find any page, and then you've got everything, you know, as far as what the different poems are and prose are all listed too, so you can find one that maybe speaks to you for that day. But well done.
Thank you.
Really nice.
Yeah, and my aim in that was I put it together that way because there's many avenues to it. You know, it's like, as opposed to some of the religious idea that, you know, that narrow is the way to find salvation, you know, whatever, however that's said. I'm not quoting it correctly, but my awareness of this is that, you know, love is infinite and vast and eternal, and there's many ways of coming to it, of understanding it, and that's what that book is. It's
right. Yep.
It may, to some people who are editors and reviewers, read through it, that seems kind of repetitive. That's by design. But I'm taking different presentations of that same idea and interjecting them in kind of a random fashion, so that you can jump in on it at any point, but still brings you to the same place.
Right, exactly. Yep. I love it. I think it's a great book.
Thank you.
Breaths of Love, Poems and Prose on Love by Michael Potter. The other thing that we wanted to touch on, and we're going to put up as we're speaking here too, we've got a big part of your life has been your digital art.
Yes.
And your photography. And I thought it was kind of interesting. And again, we could probably put up a couple of the pictures, or we will as we're talking right now, and you can tell us about the process. But I thought it was interesting when we had lunch the other day. I was looking at some of your pictures, and you told me the process of how you will literally like take one picture and it has an element that you like, and you will put it into another picture.
Yeah.
And we'll put this one up, but explain the one where it's got the rock arch. You have that. You can tell us where you took it, and then you put another image. I think it was the sun behind it.
Yeah,
I mean, that one is just an amazing picture, I think.
Thank you, and I've gotten better at that. So it's photographic manipulation. Not to compare me to Ansel Adams by any stretch of the imagination, but Ansel Adams, the famous nature photographer, used to say that the magic happens in the darkroom. And he was able to make manipulations of his negatives and his photographic process to really bring these dramatic, amazing, natural scenes together. Well, now you can do that with the software apps, with Photoshop and some other things too. So I had made an actual trip to Arches National Park in Utah and taken all these photographs of all the just amazing geological structures that are shaped by nature, and to just, another example of just how profound and amazing nature is. But I thought, it's got this kind of blue sky that's kind of boring, and God, what if there was a sun beaming behind that? How much more dramatic would that be? So I took the photograph of the arch, and there's a tool in Photoshop that allows you to draw a line around the perimeter of what you want extracted from the photograph, and then it pulls it all out of there, so you just have that standing by itself. Then from scratch I made a blank background, and then I dumped some color into it, a certain blue tint for the sky, and then it had a gradient feature that I was able to pull it down to a lighter orange at the bottom, so it kind of looked like the sky, where closer to the horizon you see more of the yellows and oranges, and it gets bluer as you go up. So that was my background. And then I had another image that I had saved, and I called it extracted Photoshop elements. I just made a sun that had a gradient kind of color scheme on it, where it was light at the top and it got darker as it went down. So I pulled that in, pasted it over my sky background, and then you can flatten it through the editing process. So now that's a standalone image. Then I went back and took my extracted arches foreground geological structure and pasted it over the image with the sun. And then flattened that so that they combined. And then I went in with my editing tools and I blended all the transitional elements so that they looked like they were actually, a real picture, that you couldn't see that there was two separate images there being brought together. It combined them so that they worked kind of synergistically together, and then gave that dramatic kind of finish. So
right.
That's just enormously entertaining to do that.
Right. Well, here's the first. We've got a tornado warning going on. So we're going to wrap it up. It's actually telling us that we should take shelter. So we're going to do that. We want to thank Mike for being on the show. We're going to have you back because we didn't really get to cover everything. So we'll have you back when we don't have a tornado.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Yeah, it was just a lot of fun and just a lot of insight. And like you said, we can spend some more time next time. Remind everybody to subscribe.
Just make sure to subscribe. So on YouTube, right underneath the video, there's a little button that says subscribe. Just click that.
So until our next episode of Curious Crossroads, have a good day. Have a good life.